Gonna kill me now, Snake?
I'm too tired. Maybe later.
In 1981, Escape from New York took audiences into a grim future where Manhattan had become a walled prison, ruled by criminals, chaos, and one-eyed anti-heroes. But behind Snake Plissken's iconic glare were wild stories, bizarre production choices, and accidents that could only happen in John Carpenter's dystopian masterpiece.
I might as well have some fun and keep looking by myself.
Fact 1.
Plissken, what are you doing?
Playing with myself. I'm going in.
John Carpenter came up with Escape from New York after the Watergate scandal. He lost faith in government and imagined a future where society just gave up on control. The idea of turning New York City into a massive prison came from his frustration with politics and crime. Carpenter said, "It was my reaction to how America was changing, cynical, violent, paranoid." The script was written in 1976 but sat on a shelf for years. Hollywood thought it was too dark, too weird, and too anti-American. It wasn't until Halloween became a hit that Carpenter was trusted to make it. What started as a political metaphor became a cult classic. But Carpenter's dark imagination wasn't the weirdest part, because the man who would become Snake Plissken almost wasn't Kurt Russell at all. Fact 2.
Wow, Snake Plissken, all right. What you doing in here with a gun, Snake?
Before Kurt Russell put on the eye patch, the studio wanted Clint Eastwood or Charles Bronson for the lead role. They thought only a classic tough guy could pull off the part, but Carpenter fought for Russell, who was mostly known for Disney movies at the time. The studio thought he was too clean-cut to play a criminal. Russell begged Carpenter for the role, saying he wanted to destroy the Disney image. Carpenter trusted him, and it changed his career forever. The eye patch, the rasping voice, the dead stare, all Russell's idea. He based Snake on Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name. The result was an anti-hero who defined the 1980s. But while Kurt became Snake, the rest of the cast faced chaos, because shooting New York City didn't happen in New York City at all. Fact 3.
Across the 69th Street Bridge, it's mined, but I know where they're planted.
We got a diagram from a guy that got all the way across before they shot the poor bastard.
You might think Escape from New York was filmed in the city it's named after, but almost none of it was. Most scenes were shot in the ruins of St. Louis, Missouri. A massive fire in 1976 had destroyed several city blocks, leaving the area looking post-apocalyptic. Carpenter saw it and said, "That's my Manhattan." The city agreed to shut off 10 blocks of power every night so the crew could film in darkness. The result was hauntingly real. Garbage fires, broken windows, and empty streets. No set could replicate it. Even the police warned the crew to be careful at night. The eerie silence made every scene feel dangerous. It gave the movie its gritty, believable tone. But if the location was intense, one prop made things even crazier, because Carpenter used a stolen Air Force gadget to pull off a futuristic effect. Fact 4.
Been a while.
The green 3D wireframe maps in Escape from New York looked like early CGI, but there was no computer involved. The graphics were actually physical wire models filmed under blacklight. Production designer Joe Alves built miniature city grids out of glowing tape and wires. When lit correctly, it looked exactly like cutting-edge computer animation. The effect fooled audiences for decades. Carpenter said, "We couldn't afford real computers, so we faked it." It became one of the most creative special effects in science fiction history. It showed that imagination could beat technology. Even decades later, filmmakers still praise its ingenuity. But while the visuals were clever, the soundtrack was pure Carpenter. And his electronic score became the heartbeat of dystopian cinema. Fact 5. John Carpenter didn't just direct Escape from New York. He also composed its eerie electronic soundtrack. He recorded it using analog synthesizers in his home studio with co-composer Alan Howarth. The result was hypnotic, pulsing, and perfectly matched to the film's mood. Carpenter believed the score was the movie's pulse. It never stops beating. The minimalist style influenced generations of composers and defined the sound of 80s sci-fi. Bands like Daft Punk, Nine Inch Nails, and even Stranger Things creators have cited it as inspiration. It wasn't flashy, but it was unforgettable. The music made New York feel like a living, breathing nightmare. And while Carpenter was layering sounds, one of his actors was making waves on set, literally, because the next star nearly drowned filming one of the movie's most dangerous stunts. Fact 6. During one of the sewer scenes, actress Adrienne Barbeau, who played Maggie, nearly drowned when she slipped into a pit of water. The underground tunnels were filmed in real, abandoned industrial basements filled with mud and debris. Barbeau later said she couldn't see or feel where she was stepping. Crew members rushed in and pulled her out just in time. The experience terrified her, but she insisted on finishing the scene. John Carpenter, her husband at the time, wanted realism and refused to fake the danger. The result was raw and claustrophobic, perfectly fitting the film's tone. That commitment to authenticity gave the movie its grit. Everyone was risking something for art. And while Barbeau fought the water, another actor battled a different kind of chaos, because Ernest Borgnine's wild taxi scenes nearly went up in flames. Fact 7.
Where you going, buddy?
Ernest Borgnine played Cabby, the cheerful driver in A World Gone Mad. His yellow taxi became one of the movie's most iconic vehicles. But the car was a nightmare to film with. It was old, unstable, and rigged with fake flamethrowers that overheated constantly. During one take, the wiring short-circuited and smoke poured from under the hood. Borgnine joked, "Guess I found the escape route." The crew had to fix it overnight just to keep filming. Despite the danger, the cab scenes became fan favorites. The mix of humor and insanity gave the film its bizarre charm. Borgnine's grin in the middle of chaos made him unforgettable. But while the cab barely survived, one of the film's biggest explosions came with a real risk, and no one expected what happened next. Fact 8.
Okay, now!
Unlike modern films that rely on CGI, Escape from New York used real pyrotechnics for every explosion. Carpenter wanted the danger to feel authentic, and it did. The fireballs were so massive that nearby residents thought a real riot was happening. The city's fire department stood by during every night shoot, ready to step in. One explosion went off earlier than planned, nearly singeing Kurt Russell. He stayed in character and kept acting through the flames. The stuntmen were stunned by his composure. Carpenter later said, "That's when I knew he was Snake Plissken." The realistic destruction added weight to the film's chaos. It wasn't just smoke and mirrors. It was fire and steel. But while the explosions brought heat, the production's biggest headache came from the sky, because filming the glider landing sequence became a technical nightmare no one saw coming. Fact 9. Snake's glider landing on the World Trade Center looks surprisingly real for 1981, but it was entirely created using miniatures. Special effects legend Jim Danforth built a model skyscraper and filmed the landing in slow motion using motion-controlled cameras. The effect was so convincing that many believed they'd used real aerial shots. The only actual footage of New York in the movie comes from this miniature sequence. Even the skyline was fake, matte paintings lit to mimic city lights. The artistry was so effective that the scene still holds up decades later. Carpenter's low-budget ingenuity fooled Hollywood. He proved you don't need millions to create magic, just creativity. But while the visuals impressed everyone, the editing process became even crazier, because the first version of Escape from New York was nothing like the one we know today. Fact 10.
Begins 20 seconds.
Originally, the film began with an extended bank robbery sequence showing how Snake Plissken got arrested. It explained his crime, his capture, and his bitterness toward the government. Carpenter loved the scene, but test audiences didn't. They said it slowed down the story. So Carpenter made the bold choice to cut it completely. He wanted the audience to meet Snake already broken, already dangerous. The result made him more mysterious and iconic. The deleted scene still exists and was later released on DVD. Watching it today, you can see why it was cut. It's interesting but less powerful. The mystery of Snake's past became part of his legend. And while that scene stayed in the vault, another moment stayed in history, because one line of dialogue became a pop culture anthem for decades to come. Fact 11.
Call me Snake.
One of the most famous lines in the film, "Call me Snake," wasn't in the original script. Kurt Russell came up with it on set after improvising several takes. He wanted Snake Plissken to have a catchphrase that summed up his attitude in 3 words. John Carpenter loved it instantly. The line became the perfect reflection of the character's detached coolness. It wasn't about heroism, it was about control. Russell's gravelly delivery made it unforgettable. The audience loved how he said it with total disinterest, like he was already bored with saving the world. The line went on to define Snake's entire personality. Decades later, it's still quoted at conventions and tattooed by fans. But if you think that line was legendary, wait till you hear who designed Snake's look, because the eye patch almost didn't happen. Fact 12.
Plane crashed 7 hours ago near 8th Avenue. Did you see it?
No.
Snake Plissken's black eye patch is one of cinema's most recognizable accessories, but it wasn't in the original design. Kurt Russell suggested it after thinking the character needed a visual scar. Carpenter agreed, though the prop team warned it might make shooting harder. Russell's depth perception was completely gone on one side. He had to rehearse movement and weapon handling over and over to avoid mistakes. Despite the discomfort, he refused to take it off. The patch gave Snake a mythic, almost comic book look. It made him instantly iconic, a warrior who'd seen too much. Russell said, "It made me feel half blind, which was perfect." The image stuck forever in pop culture, but while Snake's eye patch became legend, his name almost didn't, because the character was nearly called something completely different. Fact 13. Believe it or not, Snake Plissken was inspired by a real man John Carpenter met years earlier. He was a musician in Los Angeles who actually went by the nickname Snake. The guy had tattoos, long hair, and a cold stare, just like the character. Carpenter loved the name so much he asked to use it for his script. The real Snake agreed, saying, "As long as he's cool." When the film came out, Carpenter sent him a poster as thanks. The real Plissken became a local legend after that. Fans thought he was a myth until he showed up at screenings in the 80s. The strange connection between fact and fiction made the name even more mysterious. But while the name was real, the movie's soundtrack nearly wasn't, because Carpenter almost lost it days before release. Fact 14. Just weeks before the film's premiere, part of John Carpenter's original music tapes went missing. A shipment of master reels was lost during transport between studios. Panic spread when engineers realized half of the score had vanished. Carpenter and co-composer Alan Howarth had to re-record several cues in a single weekend. They worked non-stop, using backup synths and tape machines. The accident ended up improving the music. The new takes sounded even darker and more urgent. The lost masters were later recovered, but never used. Carpenter joked, "It was like the movie. Everything almost blew up, but somehow we survived." The experience mirrored the chaos of the film itself. And while the music was saved, the production still had one last dangerous problem to face. Something that could have literally killed the movie before it was finished. Fact 15. The climactic bridge scene, where Snake tries to cross a mined bridge, was the most dangerous part of production. The crew used real cars and practical explosives set along the path. Visibility was low, and timing had to be perfect. During one take, a charge detonated too early, missing a stunt driver by inches. Carpenter called it the scariest moment of his career. The crew reset and shot it again, this time perfectly. The bridge explosion became one of the movie's most memorable visuals. It proved how fearless the team was. Today, that kind of stunt would be done entirely with CGI, but in 1981, they risked everything for realism. The danger paid off, creating an ending that felt chaotic and real. But once the bridge blew, the legend of Escape from New York was just beginning, because the movie's legacy would stretch far beyond its low-budget roots. Fact 16. Escape from New York was made for just $6 million, a fraction of what most studio sci-fi films cost at the time. John Carpenter had to stretch every dollar. Sets were built from scrap metal, old cars, and recycled props from other movies. The crew reused fog machines from The Fog and lights from Halloween. Every explosion, every effect was practical and handmade. Carpenter called it guerrilla filmmaking with attitude. The budget forced creativity, and it worked. The film's gritty industrial style became part of its identity. What looked cheap on paper became iconic on screen. It proved that vision mattered more than money. Few directors could do so much with so little. The result? One of the most influential cult classics ever made. But that influence didn't end in the 80s, because Escape from New York went on to shape an entire generation of games, comics, and movies. Fact 17. Snake Plissken didn't just stay on screen, he changed pop culture. Hideo Kojima, creator of Metal Gear Solid, admitted that his hero Solid Snake was directly inspired by Kurt Russell's character. The eye patch, the voice, even the attitude came from Plissken. In fact, one Metal Gear sequel literally features a character named Iroquois Plissken as a tribute. Action movies of the 80s and 90s copied Snake's cool, quiet rebellion. He became the blueprint for the modern antihero. Tough, cynical, and reluctantly heroic. Comics, video games, and even cyberpunk fashion borrowed from his design. Carpenter never expected that kind of legacy, but he embraced it. He said, Snake was never meant to be a hero. That's why people love him. And while Snake inspired fiction, the movie itself inspired something even more unlikely. A sequel that no one saw coming. Fact 18. 15 years later, John Carpenter reunited with Kurt Russell for Escape from LA in 1996. It had a bigger budget, louder explosions, and wild special effects. But critics were divided. Some loved the satire, others hated the over-the-top tone. Russell still gave it everything, saying Snake was his favorite role ever. Carpenter defended the film as a parody of sequels and America itself. Over time, Escape from LA gained its own cult following. Fans now see it as a companion piece, the punk rock twin to the original's noir tone. The movie kept Snake's legacy alive for a new generation. And while that sequel split audiences, it opened the door for something bigger, because for decades, Hollywood has been trying and failing to remake the original. Fact 19. Since the early 2000s, studios have tried repeatedly to remake Escape from New York. Names like Gerard Butler, Jeremy Renner, and even Oscar Isaac were attached at different times. Every version fell apart in development. John Carpenter has turned down multiple scripts, saying, they don't understand Snake. Fans have been protective too. Few want anyone else to play the one-eyed outlaw. The project has been in development hell for over 20 years. Carpenter says if a remake ever happens, it has to feel dangerous, not digital. He's even joked that Snake might outlive Hollywood itself. Each attempt seems cursed, but maybe that's how it should be. After all, legends aren't meant to be rewritten. But while the remake may never happen, the original's reputation only grows stronger because Escape from New York became the movie that proved rebellion could be cinematic art. Fact 20. When Escape from New York premiered, critics were divided. Too dark, too weird, too cynical, but over the years it became one of the most influential films of its time. It inspired everything from Blade Runner to The Matrix and even The Dark Knight Rises. Snake Plissken became a symbol of defiance, the outlaw who saved the world but never cared for thanks. John Carpenter's vision of a crumbling America feels eerily relevant decades later. The movie's mix of anarchy, humor, and grit still hits home. It's proof that even small, scrappy films can leave a massive impact. Carpenter once said, "Snake isn't a hero, he's just free." And maybe that's why Escape from New York still resonates today. Because in a world full of rules, we all wish we had a little more snake in us.